In early January 2026, headlines blared that US forces had launched strikes in Venezuela's capital, Caracas, and captured President Nicolás Maduro. According to a Council of Foreign Relations tracker, the US conducted large-scale strikes around Caracas, an operation dubbed as Absolute Resolve, and took Maduro and his wife into custody. This dramatic turn of events shocked many observers. To understand why it happened, let's dive into the history of US-Venezuela tensions, the motivations at play, and the recent developments that led up to this operation. US-Venezuela relation, a history of tension. Supporters in Caracas hold posters of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. This scene captured on Jan 3, 2026 underscores how Chavez's socialist revolution still looms large in Venezuela. Chavez, elected in 1999, famously clashed with Washington by nationalizing the oil industry and allying with rivals like Russia and Iran. In 2002, a brief coup against Chavez, who was restored to power after 2 days, deepened mutual distrust. Over the next decade, Chavez expanded social programs funded by oil wealth, but economic mismanagement and corruption began to show. After Chavez died in 2013, his chosen successor, Maduro, took over amid economic decline. By 2014, Venezuela was mired in hyperinflation and shortages. Mass protests erupted against Maduro's government, which relied increasingly on populist spending to stay in power. In 2015, voters even gave the opposition a majority in the National Assembly, igniting a political standoff. The United States then began imposing sanctions on Venezuelan officials and oil exports, accusing Caracas of authoritarianism. In 2018, Maduro won a deeply disputed re-election amid allegations of fraud. Opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president, winning recognition from the US and dozens of other countries. According to Al Jazeera in 2024, Maduro also won another contest vote against independent Edmundo Gonzalez, with international observers criticizing the vote and many regional governments demanding a recount. The upshot is decades of enmity. Chavez's Bolivarian revolution set Venezuela on a collision course with Washington, and Maduro's regime has remained under heavy US pressure ever since. Why the intervention? Oil, drugs, and politics. Why did the US intensify its actions now? Officially, the Trump administration has portrayed the campaign as an anti narcotics and law enforcement mission. In late 2025, President Trump and US military officials repeatedly accused Venezuelan leaders of drug trafficking. For example, in February 2025, Trump labeled the Tren de Aragua crime gang a foreign terrorist organization, even calling it a front of Maduro's regime. In September 2025, the Pentagon began stacking vessels at sea suspected of ferrying narcotics from Venezuela to the US and announced plans for a new mission, Operation Southern Spear, and the US Southern Command. Indeed, a late December Reuters report noted that US forces were ordered to hit drug smuggling sites. Trump himself hinted he had hit a dock in Venezuela used to load cocaine onto boats. In short, US officials say they are trying to remove narco terrorists from the hemisphere and choke off cocaine shipments. But critics charge that oil and geopolitics are the real drivers. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, and the country's economy has been ruined by years of mismanagement. 92% of the exports came from oil by 2013. At a press conference after Maduro's capture, Trump declared that major US oil companies would move into rebuild Venezuela's petroleum infrastructure. Observers immediately questioned why oil was emphasized if this were truly a drug enforcement action. International experts pointed out that rebuilding Venezuela's oil fields would cost years of investment, suggesting that controls of oil profits and denying them to rivals like China and Russia is a major motive. There are also political and humanitarian arguments. The US has long denounced Maduro's government as a dictatorship, citing a humanitarian crisis that has driven millions from the country. Over 8 million people of Venezuela have fled since 2015, creating a regional refugee emergency. US officials claim they seek to restore democracy and stability, but critics say regime change, rhetoric, and military actions risk creating chaos. As one US congressman put it on social media, he feared Trump's hunger for a regime change war and saw echoes of past conflict in Iraq and Libya. In summary, narratives diverge. Washington insists this is about drug and democracy, while opponents say it is about grabbing oil and overthrowing a socialist government. The truth likely involves elements of both, set against decades of mutual suspicion and strategic rivalry. Operation Southern Spear and the US buildup. In November 2025, the Trump administration made the campaign official. On November 14, 2025, the Pentagon announced Operation Southern Spear, a new mission under US Southern Command aimed at countering drug networks in the region. At the same time, the US sent an unprecedented show of force, an entire carrier strike group led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, along with amphibious ships, destroyers, stealth fighters, and thousands of troops was deployed to the Caribbean. The FAA even issued warning to civilian airliners about hazards in Venezuelan airspace due to heightened military activity, causing many flights to be suspended. Shortly after announcing Southern Spear, US forces began striking targets at sea. Since September 2025, more than 20 lethal strikes have been reported on vessels the Pentagon identified as carrying cocaine or serving designated terrorist organizations. Reuters noted one such strike in late December 2025 when Joint Task Force Southern Spear destroyed a suspected drug boat in the Eastern Pacific. According to US officials, dozens of smugglers have been killed and footage of drone attacks on narco speedboats has been shared by the Pentagon. These actions have gone largely unchallenged in Washington, though international authorities question the legal justification. On December 29, 2025, President Trump specifically mentioned a land strike inside Venezuela for the first time. In West Palm Beach, he said US forces had just hit a clandestine drug loading facility on the Venezuelan coast, a remote dock allegedly used by the Tren de Aragua gang to ship cocaine onto boats. White House and Pentagon spokesman declined to confirm whether the CIA or special forces conducted the attack, but unverified reporting suggested it was indeed a covert CIA drone strike on a port in Zulia State. The Venezuelan government offered no official comment, though local media noted an explosion at a chemical plant around that time, which plant's officials said was unrelated. In any case, this incident demonstrated that the US was willing to act inside Venezuela itself, not just in international waters. The strike on Caracas and capture of Maduro. All of the above set the stage for what happened on January 3rd, 2026. In the breakdown hours, US forces launched a coordinated assault on Caracas and surrounding areas. Council of Foreign Relations analysts report that the operation, codenamed Absolute Resolve, involved strikes on multiple targets, including military bases, that briefly knocked out power in parts of the city. According to President Trump's announcement on his social media platform, highly trained US Special Operations Troops Delta Force then stormed into Maduro's compound in Caracas. The Reuters account suggests the raid was shipped and meticulously planned. US soldiers had rehearsed by building a replica of Maduro's safe house, while CIA operatives on the ground monitored his movements for months. When the assault began, Maduro and his wife Kilia Flores reportedly tried to escape but were quickly cornered. According to Trump, the Venezuelan leader was busted so quickly that he could not even reach an inner safe room. Maduro and Flores surrendered without a firefight and were taken into custody. A short time after, Trump tweeted an image of Maduro's blindfolded and handcuffed on the deck of US warship, the USS Iwo Jima. By Saturday evening, Maduro had been flown on a military aircraft to New York, where US officials confirmed he was in federal custody. He is expected to face charges in Manhattan court, including drug trafficking and narco-terrorism, offenses for which he had previously been indicted by US prosecutors. In a press conference, Trump said he intended to keep Venezuela under US control until such time that we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition, explicitly mentioning plans to develop the country's vast oil reserves and to help repatriate displaced Venezuelans. The aftermath of the attack is visible in this Caracas street scene. A firefighter walks among the charred wreckage of military vehicles and buses. Government reports indicated that at least some part of the city, including an anti-aircraft site at La Carlota Air Base, were heavily damaged by the strikes. The operation was nearly bloodless on the US side. Trump said a few US troops were wounded but none killed. What was bloodless for Washington looks catastrophic for Venezuela. Images like this one highlight the dramatic escalation of force on Venezuela soil. Reactions and international response. The US operation drew immediate and heated reaction around the world. In Caracas, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, sworn in as interim president on Saturday, condemned the raid as a barbaric and illegitimate kidnapping of Venezuelan leader. On state television, she declared Maduro the only president of Venezuela and demanded his immediate release. Venezuela's Supreme Court swiftly recognized Rodriguez as interim president, and the government declared a state of external disturbance, essentially a state of emergency. The Defense Ministry ordered all forces to be ready to repel any further aggression. In short, Chavez's successor vowed Venezuela would not submit quietly to this intervention. Regional governments also protested strongly. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva denounced the US actions as crossing an unacceptable line and a grave affront to Venezuela's sovereignty. He called for a vigorous UN response and said Brazil was monitoring its border for potential refugee flows. Other Latin American leaders, from Mexico to Argentina to leftist capitals like Mexico City and Havana, issued statements calling the strike illegal. Even some US lawmakers criticized the move. Democrats who had been briefed told Reuters they were misled by administration and demanded a detailed plan from the Pentagon on how long US forces would remain. International lawyers note that abducting a foreign head of state raises serious questions under the US Constitution and international law. US officials did not disclose any UN mandate or regional authorization of the operation. In short, critics say the US had set a dangerous precedent. One commentator compared it to a past US invasion of Panama or Iraq. Indeed, Reuters reminded us that this is the first direct US military intervention in Latin America since 1989, where George H.W. Bush sent troops into Panama to oust Manuel Noriega on similar direct trafficking charges. Worldwide, the invasion of sovereignty has alarmed diplomats and human rights groups. Many fear it could spark a broader conflict or further destabilize the region. What happens next? For now, Venezuela's fate hangs in limbo. Though Maduro in US custody, the Venezuelan state apparatus has not collapsed. The military is still intact inside the country and the opposition is divided. US officials have refused to name any Venezuelan leader to govern on the ground besides saying people behind me, mentioning Marco Rubio and Pete Hexet would run things. The White House, they are not afraid of boots on the ground, hinting at a possible extended occupation. Meanwhile, in New York, Maduro faces trial. How the US handles him and what it does with Venezuela afterward will be closely watched. Some analysts worry about a power vacuum. Neighboring countries, Colombia, Brazil, Caribbean islands, fear instability or a new wave of migrants. Others ask how this will affect global politics. Russia and China have long backed Maduro and they have already condemned the raid. It is possible the US will use some provisional local leaders to try to form a transitional government. But in any event, the US now faces the complex task of governing a country of 28 million overnight without obvious consent from most Venezuelans. One thing is clear, this marks a decisive break from decades of US policy. As Reuters notes, it recalls the Monroe Doctrine era of American unilateralism. For a student of history, it raises the same question America faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. How long will US forces remain and what are the exit plans? Will Congress demand an authorization for this military action? How will international law and United Nations respond? For now, global eyes are on Caracas and Washington. The situation remains fluid. What do you think? Does the US action stand up as a justified anti drug mission or is it an unlawful grab for oil and power? Can Venezuela's democracy ever be restored by force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more in depth updates. History is being made in real time. Stay informed and stay curious.